Hey guys, I just found out during editing that I forgot to make a little intro for this video, so you don't know what it's about. But this video is about how you can get MIDI access in the browser, so you can connect a MIDI keyboard to your computer and through the browser and JavaScript play sounds. So we're going to be making a little simple synthesizer. I hope you enjoy it. See ya. Okay, so here I opened up my text editor, Visual Studio Code, and I set up some basic HTML where I link to a JavaScript file that I have here as well, and this one is totally empty. So this should hopefully work. I also have in my Visual Studio Code, I have the live server installed, which you can install as well. Somewhere it's here, you can search for this live server, then install it. That makes it really easy and nice to just right click on index file and just open with live server. And then I will get it right here in my browser, and I'm using Chrome right now. I'm going to start by opening up the console here, and then I'm going to have a look at the navigator object that lives on the global object on the window. So I can just type in navigator, and you get this object here, and you probably, or you maybe have worked with this before. This is where you get a lot of information about the hardware on the computer, about the browser, about what languages have you installed on it, and what kind of plugins do you have. So this is if you have a MIDI device or any hardware connected to your computer that the browser can access, then this is where you will find that. And that is where we're going to be looking for this MIDI access object as well. So if we go back to the code and we go to our app.js, then the first thing I want to check is if it actually exists, if the browser supports this get MIDI access that we want to find. So let's just have an if statement. So if on the navigator object here, if we have request MIDI access, if that exists, then we want to do something. We just want to take the navigator object and then we want to request it. And that's a function. So we run this one, and then after we have checked if this actually exists in our browser, if the browser is capable of using this, then we want to do something. So we're just tagging on this returns a promise, so we can tag on and then. And what we want to do here, we're going to pass two arguments to this, and the first one is success. So this is a function that will run if we have access to the MIDI in the browser. And another one if we do not, so let's call that failure. Okay, so this is the basic setup. This is like here we check, do we actually have this? Does this even exist? And then if it exists, then we want on, if it's connected, we want to run the success function, and if not, we're going to run the failure. So let's just make the failure first. Oh, gotta be a function. And that is just going to console log. Let's say could not connect MIDI. Okay. So hopefully that will not run ever, but you never know. And then we need the success. So function success, and that is going to do something as well. We're going to take in the MIDI access, because this is what we get. If this one up here is a success, then it'll automatically pass in a parameter to our function here, and that is a MIDI access parameter. Just let's have a look at what that looks like. So console log, and that's the MIDI access. Okay, let's try and go to the browser, and I'm gonna open up this one right here. And I can see I get the MIDI access here. So I open this one up, and I can see I have an input, I have an output, I have an on state change, and I have some sysx enabled. So the first thing I want to talk about is the input. So this actually shows, this just shows that it has a size of 2. That means we have 2 inputs. On my particular MIDI keyboard, there are 2 inputs, and there is 1 output, as you can see here as well. We can't really get much of this here, but it has a prototype, and we can run it for each on it. So we can take all of the different MIDI inputs that we have, and then we can run it for each on that and do something to to every single input and output if that's necessary. But in this tutorial, we are only going to be focusing on the input because we're not going to output anything from the browser to a MIDI device. We're just going to take the input from a MIDI device into the browser and then play around with that. As you noticed, it's also has this on state change, and this is an event listener. So whenever something happens here, this one will fire. So let's just try and put that in here just to check out what it does. So we can take the MIDI axis, and you can actually just go ahead and use the on state change and just set it equal to a function. So let's say that here we want to check how many devices are connected and what devices are connected to our computer. So let's just call it update devices. And this will be a function. So we have to create this function as well down here. So let me just do that. And it will pass in an event. So let's get that event here. And see what happens here. So initially when I save this, this is gonna run. So the state has been changed when you save it or when you load it in the browser. But let me just try. I'm just gonna take my keyboard and I'm gonna unplug it. So that is 3 different events of the type state change. And the reason that we have 3 events firing here is because I have 2 inputs and 1 output on my MIDI device. So that could be different for your MIDI device. Maybe there's only 1 input or several outputs. I don't know. But let me try to reconnect it. So I'm gonna plug it in, and then I get this one as well. So I can see it's of the type state change. If I open up when I connected it here, I want to use the input, and then I can get some information about what is this stuff. On the port property here, I get some information about, is it open, is it closed, it has an ID, and then you can see the manufacturer of my MIDI keyboard and the model, the name of the model, and yeah, things like that. So basically what you could use this for is if you want to display a list, maybe a drop-down list or something like that with the different MIDI devices that are connected to your computer, so that will update for every time someone connects a new one, then that is what you want to do here. Actually, you can also listen to the event in the old-fashioned way if you want to do that, and then add event listener. And the event listener we want to add is the state change, and then we just want to do the update devices. That will also work, and maybe you like that better. So I'm just going to comment this one out and test if this one works. So I'm going to unplug my MIDI device, and as you can see, it still works. So now we know how to fire an event every time that something happens to our MIDI list, the list of MIDI devices that we have connected to our computer. I'm just going to delete this line first so we can continue. I'm going to keep this one here because this explains a bit more what we're actually doing. We're listening for an event. So I like that better. So to make it a little bit more interesting, we could have a look at the port, or we could just let me just say console log something else. Maybe we want a console log the name of it, and that would be the event that we're getting, and then the port that we looked at before, and then we have a property called name on this one here. That's awesome. So maybe we want to get the brand, and that would be also event, port, and then manufacturer. Like that. And let's get the state. That would be also event, port, and state, funnily enough. Oops, if I could spell like that. And let's get the type. That is going to be the type. So event, port, type. Let's just see what happens if I go back to the browser and I disconnect it. Well, as you can see, we're getting the name, that's the model. So SE25 MIDI-1, and the brand is Nectar, and the state is disconnected, and the type is output. You can see it's an input, and actually you can see I have MIDI-1, MIDI-2, and MIDI-1 here because this is an output, and as we talked about before, I have two different inputs, so we have MIDI-1 and MIDI-2. Let me just reconnect it again. We're not going to be using this a lot. I just wanted to show you that this is how you can update a list of connected devices if that's what you want to do. But let's get back to the code and try something else. Let me delete this one here, and let's just keep this one here for good measures. Then up here in our success, we want to continue doing stuff here. I'm just going to keep this all the way at the top here, and then we want to test, we want to get our inputs. So I'm going to make a constant, call it inputs, and that is going to be equal to the MIDI access.inputs. Remember, we had two inputs, so if I console log my inputs here, let's try that. Go back to the browser. I just get this MIDI input map with the size of 2, and there's not really anything on it, but we have a prototype and we can loop over it. So that's what we're gonna do, because we wanna list on all of our different MIDI input devices. If you know that you're only going to be using the first one, then you can just select that. But I'm not sure actually which input my MIDI device is using or sending to. So I'm just going to listen on all of them. So I'm going to take inputs, and then I'm going to run for each on it. And for every single input that we have, we want to do something, and first let's just console log it, right? So that would be the input. So we get these two, and we also get something called on MIDI message, just like we got up here before. We got on state change. We got another one we can listen for, and that functions kind of the same way. We want to listen for when something happens, when somebody sends a MIDI message to the browser, we want to do something. So we can do that here by adding event listeners to it. So one way of doing that is exactly what we did before. We can go ahead and we can say input on MIDI message, and then set it equal to the function that we want to run every time. So I'm just gonna call that handle input, and then we can down here we can have another one called handle input. Actually, I want to put it up here, I think. So function handle input, that will also take an event that is sent to this, and then let's try and console log the event. Let's see what happens here. So when something happened here on MIDI message. Okay, maybe I should not have this right here. Okay, let me try to save that again. And now I'm going to try to play my keyboard. Oh, and every time I press a key, something happens on the screen. When I hold down one key, I get this MIDI message here, event will fire. And when I let go of the key, another event fires. So when I press down, I get an event firing, and when I let go, I get an event firing. Let's try and open one of them. Let's have a look at this one. The most interesting thing, and what we're going to be using here, is the data property. This is just an array of 3 different numbers. The first one is the command. What do you want? This is a MIDI command. What do you want the computer to do when you get this command here from the keyboard? And this one here is the MIDI number. So that means that I press down middle C, because middle C on a keyboard, the note middle C, is equal to 60 when it comes to MIDI numbers. And 0, that is the velocity. So that is how hard I hammer it down. Because this is when I let go of the key, it has a velocity of 0. But I can try again. Let me just clear this, and then so I started very gently, and I get a velocity of 46 here. I get the next, let's open up this one maybe. I get a velocity of 0 because that's 93 here. And it goes all the way up to, let's see here, this is not it, but this is it right here. I get 127, and that is maximum, so that is full power. So we're going to be playing around with all this stuff. This is what we need. Let's go back to the code. But just like I did with this one, I want to use add event listener instead of this one here. I like that better. So I'm going to take input, and I'm going to add event listener. And the event that we're going to listen for is MIDI message. And then we're just going to fire the handle input like so. I'm going to delete this one here, and maybe I should remove this. And then I'm going to go and see if it still works, and it does, so that's awesome. We're still getting all of this information. So yeah. So in our handle input, let's separate these three different variables we're getting. We're getting the command, the note, and the velocity. So let's start by taking the command, and we're going to set that equal to event. But actually, I'm going to change that to input because that's a little bit more descriptive. And then on the data property, we have this array, and we want to get the first index of that array. And then we're just gonna copy this and paste it in a couple of times, because this one in the middle, that's going to be the note, and that is going to be the second item. And then we need the velocity, how hard you hit the key, and that is going to be the third item here. So let's just try and console log those. Command, note, and velocity. So now they should be separated into different variables. So yeah, this is exactly what I want. When I hit a key, I get 144, I get 60 as the note, and I get 127 as how hard I hit it. I'm gonna try another key now, and this is like key number 55, and I only hit it with the 111 miles per hour, or a velocity of 111. So yeah, that makes sense. This command called 144, that means note on. So that means that the note is down, is being played right now, so it's on. You're probably wondering, how come it doesn't have another, when we're releasing the note, how come it doesn't have another number here, another command? Because the note should not be on anymore if you release the key, right? But there are different ways. Different MIDI devices do this in different ways. My MIDI device does it like it just, you're gonna have to use the velocity, because if the velocity is 0, you can be pretty sure that this note is not playing anymore. So it doesn't bother changing the command right here. But some MIDI devices use 128 for note off. And in that case, you will not have the third 0 here. Because you don't need that, because you already know that 127 means the note is off. So in that case, when you release the note, you will only get an array with 2 items in it, the command, and then what key should be turned off, what note should be shut off. So now that we know that, we can make a little statement here. We can go ahead and let's try the switch statement. And we're gonna pass in the command here, because that's what we are going to have a look at. So in the case that this is 144, let me just add a comment that note is on. And in the case of that, we just want to add an if statement here, because we need some other information. So if the velocity is greater than 0, then we know that it's actually on, right? I have to spell this correctly. Then the note is on. I'm just going to put this in here. Note is on. And I'm missing a colon up here, like that. So then we know that the note is on. If that is not the case, then we write an else statement. We know that is off. Note is off, right? So that's the first one. Let's try the next one here. We want to break out of it, of course. We don't want to continue here. So let's take the next case, and that's what I talked about before. In case it is 128, we know that that is the note off command. So here we can just go ahead and we can make sure that the note is off, and then we break out of it here. So that doesn't do anything here, but we know that the note is on here. So instead, I'm just going to call a function that I haven't yet written. So I'm going to take note on, and we're going to pass in the note that we want to play and the velocity of that note. And then we are pretty sure that the note is off here. So we're going to write another function called note off, and we don't have to pass anything into that one. And of course, this is also our second case. If your MIDI device doesn't send 144 with a velocity of 0 for off, then it will send a 128 instead. And we just want to do the same thing. We just want to turn off the note. So I hope this makes sense. We can go ahead and write our functions now. So note on is going to be a function, and it's going to take, well, we can see the note and the velocity. So note velocity. Okay. And I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm just going to console log note and velocity. All right. And I'm going to make a note off as well. And we don't need anything here. Actually, we do need to pass the note into this one because we want to know which note we want to turn off. I don't know why I forgot that, but of course we want to do that. So down here in note off, we're going to take the note, but we're not going to take the velocity because we know that either it's missing or it's 0. So that is basically what it is here. So let's try, and I think I have a lot of, do I have a lot of console logs here? I do. So note on, note off is fine. This one is also okay. I'm just gonna delete all of these here so we don't get too confused. Okay, let's save that, go back to the browser and see what happens when I play on my keyboard. So as you see, when the note is on, I get the key that is played. This case it's 55, and I pressed really hard, so it's 127. When I let go of the key, I should get 55 because that is the note that we want to turn off. Okay, so that works. Now we just need to add some sound to this, and we're going to try and do that in the next video, where we're going to be using the Web Audio API to create a little synthesizer, or actually just a simple little oscillator node that will play for every time that you hit the key on your keyboard. So yeah, see you in the next video.